Good evening, everyone. I'm Brian Trumbore with your nightly review for Wednesday, December 12th. Just a touch of Robin Trower. This is going to be this is being taped about 4:05 p.m. Eastern Time, and we have a lot to discuss. First off, the Dow Jones was down a whopping 3 points, 13,245. S&P 500 unchanged. NASDAQ down 8 to 30.13. Gold closed at 17.12, up $3. Oil 86.80, up $1. And the 10-year Treasury, the yield climbed to 1.70%. So let's start off with the fiscal cliff. President Obama and House Speaker Boehner traded proposals late Tuesday, but Republicans continue to wait for details on spending cuts, especially as they pertain to entitlements, while Democrats want to see Republicans make an offer with higher tax rates on the wealthy. Obama, in an interview with ABC's Barbara Walters, said, quote, "I'm pretty confident that Republicans would not hold middle-class taxes hostage to trying to protect tax cuts for high-income individuals." This afternoon, Boehner said there are serious differences between him and Obama. House GOP whip Kevin McCarthy said, "I think it's getting worse, not better." House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi said Wednesday morning, "One of the things that we object to is raising the Medicare age. Don't go there." So the game of chicken continues, as well as the looming debt ceiling issue, which is kind of being buried the last few days. So on to the Fed, the Federal Reserve. This afternoon, it announced a fresh round of bond buying to try to boost the U.S. economy. Its Operation Twist program, in which the central bank buys longer-term bonds and swaps them for shorter-term ones, expires at the end of the year. So the central bank now said it will buy $45 billion a month in longer-term treasuries in its ongoing effort to keep long-term interest rates down, and of course encourage you and I and firms to borrow and spend more. While the monthly $45 billion purchases in Operation Twist were funded by sales and redemptions of short-term debt, the new purchases will expand the Fed's $2.8 trillion balance sheet. The Fed also said it would continue to buy $40 billion per month in mortgage-backed securities. Its third round of quantitative easing, as announced in September, or really QE infinity, coupled with these Treasury purchases. The Fed's statement read in part, "The committee remains concerned that without sufficient policy accommodation, economic growth might not be as strong enough to generate sustained improvement in labor market conditions." But in a surprise move, a truly historic one, the Fed adopted numerous thresholds, numerical thresholds, for future interest rate policy, which it had not been expected to do until maybe next year. So the Fed said it expects to keep rates at the exceptionally low range, 0, as long as the unemployment rate remains above 6.5%. Inflation between 1 and 2 years ahead is projected to be no more than a half percentage point above the committee's 2% longer run goal, or 2.5%. And longer-term inflation expectations continue to be well anchored. But the key is They're going to keep rates low, they say, as long as the unemployment rate remains above 6.5%. We currently stand at 7.7%. The statement read, "The committee views these thresholds as consistent with its earlier data-based guidance." And Ben Bernanke is clearly very concerned over the looming fiscal cliff, but I'll have much more on this whole topic, including the Fed, tomorrow. I'm going to follow my adage of wait 24 hours. In Europe, former Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi offered to drop his plans to run for premier on the condition that Italian Premier Mario Monti agreed to enter the election campaign and lead a coalition of moderates, as reported by Andrew Davis of Bloomberg. Berlusconi at a press conference today said, "If Monti decides to accept the request of the whole moderate bloc and run as the candidate for premiership, I would not have any problem in withdrawing my candidacy for prime minister and could accept to be the coordinator of the coalition." In Greece, the debt buyback program fell slightly short of target, but it's expected Eurozone finance ministers will release the long-delayed aid from Greek bailout 2 so the country can pay its bills. While in Germany, Finance Minister Wolfgang Schäuble said he was willing to compromise on some of his long-standing objections to a single banking supervisor for all Eurozone banks, but this is a complex issue. He'll have more tomorrow as another key EU summit gets underway. And in the UK, some good news. Between August and October, for that 3-month period, unemployment fell to 7.8%. Total pay, as they describe it, was up 1.8% compared with the same period last year. Again, that's good. North Korea defied the world by successfully launching a 3-stage rocket with an unknown cargo that appears to have been placed in orbit, perhaps a box of Twinkies or rice-a-roni, though the country has talked of placing a satellite into orbit, and a television newsreader said, quote, "The satellite has entered the planned orbit." NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, did confirm an object appeared to achieve orbit, and indeed North Korean space officials said later that the satellite was to study crops and weather patterns. But may I suggest weather.com for that, and for all your farming needs, subscribe like I do to High Plains Journal. A little cheaper. This is, though, however, a legitimately huge step in demonstrating North Korea has the ability to launch a nuclear warhead once it figures out how to miniaturize its nuclear weapons. So it certainly seems to be a triumph for Kim Jong-un, solidifying his leadership position. The launch, ironically, follows South Korea's recent cancellation because of technical problems of an attempt to launch its first satellite from its own territory. The UN Security Council condemned North Korea today. However, diplomats say further tough sanctions are unlikely to be agreed to, as China, the North's only remaining ally, will oppose them. By the way, how much of a surprise was the launch? I received this note yesterday afternoon. Reuters reported North Korea has begun taking apart the space rocket it plans to launch later this month in an effort to gain access to a malfunctioning module on the rocket's first stage. Well, of course, hours later, boom, there goes the rocket. That's rather comical. For my own part, I said on Monday that the launch window was extended to in my words, December 15th to December 29th, so I don't feel like I was that bad. But there was no intelligence service that picked this up. It reminds me of how the CIA missed Pakistan and India's initial nuclear test. Not good in the long run, sports fans. Egypt's opposition National Salvation Front has urged supporters to vote no in Saturday's referendum on the Islamist-written draft constitution. But then it confuses the issue by saying, however, it could still call a boycott if its demands for the ballot, including the judiciary acting as overseer, were not met. And recall, I think it was yesterday I told you that the judges have walked out, and under Egyptian law, the judges are supposed to oversee the ballot. In a separate development, unity talks called for today by the head of the armed forces were postponed with no real explanation. A Bloomberg national poll shows that when it comes to President Obama, support for his handling of negotiations with congressional Republicans increased to 45% from 41% in March. Okay. And that his handling of the economy has surged to 48% from 41% approval in September. But this is what gets me. In foreign affairs, Americans, according to this Bloomberg national poll, now approve of Obama's handling of international affairs, 54% compared to 45% in September. I don't, for the life of me, understand what these 54% see. President Obama's foreign policy has been an unmitigated disaster, as is being proved every day, especially in Syria. Last night in the Barbara Walters interview, Obama said the U.S. would formally recognize a coalition of Syrian opposition groups finally joining France, the UK, Turkey, and Gulf states. The New York Times reported that, New York Times quoted Andrew Tabler, a senior fellow and Syrian expert at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, as follows: the recognition is designed as a political shot in the arm for the opposition, but it's happening in the context of resentment among the Syrian opposition, especially armed elements, of the White House's lack of assistance during the Syrian people's hour of need. This is especially true among armed groups. Nabil al-Amir, an official spokesman for the rebel military council for Damascus, said, quote, "Anti-American sentiment is growing because the Americans are messing up in bigger ways lately. With every step to correct earlier mistakes," said al-Amir, "they make a bigger mess." What have I been saying for well over a year, about 18 of the 20 months since this whole crisis started? It's too late. We blew it. President Obama blew it. Tensions between the United States and the Syrian opposition surfaced at a meeting in Marrakesh today, when the leader criticized Washington's designation of the Islamist Jabhat al-Nusra rebel brigade as a terrorist organization. Muaz al-Khatib urged the United States to reconsider its decision to designate the militant Islamist group. Specifically said the decision to consider a party that is fighting the regime as a terrorist party needs to be reviewed. I mean, this is just a mess. Just a mess. Forces loyal to Assad have been firing Scud missiles. That was first reported by the New York Times and confirmed today by a U.S. official. A State Department spokeswoman, Victoria Nuland, said, "As the regime becomes more and more desperate, we see it resorting to increased lethality and more vicious weapons moving forward. Finally, Hugo Chavez faces a very complex and difficult recovery from his fourth cancer surgery in Cuba. That's according to the Vice President, Nicolas Maduro, his hand-picked successor. Not good for Chavez. My prediction is his days are significantly numbered. Evidently, his family was at his, or is at his bedside in Havana. So I will make the prediction that Chavez is gone shortly. I'll define that more definitively tomorrow. By the way, the Constitution of Venezuela states that should the president leave office in the first 4 years of his term, an election must be held within 30 days. That's all for tonight. I'll be back with you on Thursday. Keep the men and women of our armed forces in your thoughts and prayers. And for more stuff, go to stocksandnews.com. I'm Brian Trumbord. Take care.
Let the sweet wine of life